There's something about fishing that stirs up an energy and excitement from deep within us. It could come from landing a personal best fish or by helping someone land their first fish ever. It's stories shared around the dinner table, and after a day on the water, the goal of learning more about the wonders that surround us. To us, it's the things that give our lives purpose and meaning. These are the stories told by the avid, the dedicated, and the passionate. This is the Love of Fishing podcast. The Love of Fishing podcast is proudly powered by Peter's Tackle and sponsored by Freedom Tackle, Silver Salmon, Dreamweaver, Team Underdog Cutbait, and Grimsby Tackle. Hello everybody and welcome to the Love of Fishing podcast, brought to you by Peter's Tackle. I'm your host, Lyle Gator. I'd like to start off by saying, wow, we have a great show in store this week. This week we're talking to Ron Arnold from the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources. Ron is a conservation officer there, and to have a CO speak on the show is both a great honor and a great opportunity for you, the listener, to get some insight into exactly what that looks like. It is going to be a great show. Ron shares his insights about field work, about what it means to be a CO, and how COs are there to help promote and conserve our great fishing and hunting opportunities here in Ontario. But before we do a deep dive into that conversation, I need to thank this week's supporting sponsors. Thank you to Freedom Tackle, to the Silver Salmon Challenge, to Grimsby Tackle, to Team Dreamweaver, and to Team Underdog Cutbait for their generous sponsorship and support of the Love of Fishing podcast. Guys, without these supporting sponsors, the show would not be possible, so remember them next time you hit the store. I know there's lots of choices out there, but these guys love fishing too. I'd like to welcome those listening both on YouTube and on Spotify. We are on both platforms this year, so if you're checking us out on YouTube, thank you. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you're new and you're joining on Spotify, welcome to the Love of Fishing podcast. Now, let's jump into this week's discussion with Ron Arnold. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Love of Fishing podcast. I'm your host, Lyle Gator, and today I'm joined by Ron Arnold. Ron is a conservation officer with the Ministry of Natural Resources here in Niagara. Ron, welcome.
Hey, Lyle, thanks for having me.
So we've got a few questions today that we're going to go through. We're going to learn a little bit about what exactly a conservation officer does here in Ontario. We're also going to get some behind the scenes looks at what Ron's day looks like when he's out on the water or in the field, as well as hopefully some interesting stories. So Ron, did I cover everything with that, or is there anything you want to add?
No, it sounds good there, Lyle. Yeah, big role here in Ontario, and you've got a lot of COs that are dedicated to what it is that they're up to.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for a bit of background, obviously you are a fisherman and maybe a hunter as well.
Absolutely, I fish and hunt, and I've fished locally in a lot of tournaments over the years here in the Niagara region. Was a member of a few of the angling clubs. I do get out to speak to some of our angling clubs and keep in touch with a lot of the groups in Hamilton and Niagara. Fished both Great Lakes, so the Niagara River, part of the Kawarthas. Managed to get into the U.S. and I fished tournaments, bass tournaments up in the Kawarthas years ago, and some of our big water stuff. Had a lot of fun doing that. I understand it. I understand what these things are all about. And but once you get the badge and you start to actually do this job, your role is now flipped from finding time to actually get back out and fish, to actually watching everybody else fish and have a good time when they're out there. So and you do hear at time and time again, man, I haven't seen a CO in forever, or man, I've never met you. And I'll say, well, I've never met you either. There's so many people in this province that we get to meet. So it's certainly a rewarding career. But yes, I absolutely have a passion for fishing and hunting and outdoors, and that's what makes a lot of good conservation officers, because they have a good understanding of what it means to to not only have fun, chasing fish and wildlife in a sense of harvesting legally, but also what it means to protect it and to keep it sustainable for the future for all of us.
I love that. I love that a lot. It's a valuable role, and I think a lot of people don't fully understand everything that goes into it. Maybe if they haven't met you, you guys aren't always, obviously you're there to enforce the law, but you're not always there, as the bad guy, right? You want to see everybody following the rules, and you want these great things that we have in the province to be there for a long time, and that's really what your role is. Could you go through maybe possibly a day on the road or on the water? What does it look like for you day in and day out? And maybe there's some variability. I can imagine there is. Obviously, the outdoors is kind of a wild kingdom, but just take me through maybe a typical day.
So, I was on the Marine unit for many years. As you know, I have shifted my role in the last couple of years to media and content creation. But for example, a day here in the Niagara region could be, waking up early in the morning, making sure I scout reports on what's going on, communicating with a lot of my contacts, and checking the weather before I head out, and so I know where I'm going to you know stick my nose in and look around. But for example, if I were to head to Lake Erie, one of our vessels is moored up in Port Colborne. That is a semi-eutrophic fishery that has a lot of great game fish that folks love to catch.
Mm-hmm.
And it is different. It certainly is a different beast than Lake Ontario, as you know, if you've taken your Lund out in different water conditions, what Lake Ontario versus Lake Erie can do to you in a
Oh
day.
yeah,
But
absolutely.
absolutely, but so I'll head out with a partner or with Niagara Regional Police. Usually work with the Marine unit there as well. We work closely together just to give each other support and
Mm-hmm.
partnership. We're able to kind of building those partnerships with my local police is so important because they're there for me when I need help, and I'm there for them when they need the help as well. So we'll head out of Port Colborne, and we'll have gauntlet runs, places that we get to know where we find things happening.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily based on tips, but when we're out there. So, for example, I'll be watching the provincial fish sanctuaries that are located in the Eastern Basin here. And there are 4 of them on Lake Erie that are not marked by buoys. They are actually now described through coordinates. So
Yes.
it's very important that anglers, take their time to go to Google Earth and zoom in and try and pinpoint those spots. I mean, these sanctuaries have been there for as long as I've been a CO. They've been here for a very long time. But it's important that I'm out there providing a presence with a large commercial vessel that's fully marked, and that the public gets a chance to talk to me and to say hello and ask questions. And I also, do a lot of education.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot to learn. There's a lot to know. I mean, when I first got on this job, you don't know everything. You think you know everything, but you got a long way to go, right? It's no longer I'm the fisherman. It's now okay. I'm the CO that's representing all of you. I'm out there, keeping an eye on our fish and wildlife and providing them a voice
Yeah.
when some folks choose not to allow them to be what they are. But yeah, I'll get out there and I'll monitor various locations. Because we are close to an international border, one of our major roles in the Niagara region is invasive species and things crossing our border waters on that imaginary line that you see on your charts.
Mm-hmm.
Making sure that I'm chatting with our U.S. anglers when obviously when they were permitted to cross the border. They're permitted now, but back then when we were in our pandemic stages of the first closures, we didn't have cross-border traffic very much when it came to on the water.
Right.
So a typical day would be inspecting the buckets. What are you bringing into the country? You can't import anything. You can't bring across any of that bait,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very important. And when you talk to anglers, the reason why we're so hot to trot about bait and bait fish movement, it actually opens their eyes up to a whole new world of the science or the reasoning behind why we have a law in the first place.
Right.
And and I'll give an example. As I'm patrolling Lake Erie, I'll pull up to an angler and they might be off of somewhere off of Fort Erie and on the Canadian side, and it's a U.S. angler, and I'll check for a non-resident license first, say hello, Public safety equipment is always a first as well, because I want to make sure that they've got their approved equipment on board.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll do an inspection. It's good to look through the things that I need to look through for invasive species or over limits, or ensuring that they are catching fish during the season. And then they'll usually ask questions about what's the big deal about bait. And this is what's going to be very interesting to your listeners. And I'll describe this to you. One of the things that I learned over the years through the Great Lakes Fisheries Commission and the meetings and committees that I've been on
Mm-hmm.
is put this into perspective for you. In Ontario, around the Great Lakes region, our bait fish harvesters can keep up with the supply and demand from anglers. There's bait that you can go to in Niagara region. There's a few places you can buy live bait. It's supplied by licensed commercial harvesters here in the province of Ontario. In the United States, around the Great Lakes region, those harvesters are only able to keep up with approximately 12% of the demand of all bait that's needed for angling in their states. So if you
Wow.
put that into perspective, what we had, if you remember those corridors, remember how we had bait coming from Arkansas and Indiana? We still have bait coming up the highways, okay?
Yeah.
There are bait fish farms that come up the highway, okay? And all of this bait comes to our borders into the stores in the United States to help support the bait fish industry because people wanted live bait.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when the scientists from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service did DNA studies in the tanks and in those ponds, DNA of Asian carp was located in that water, which
Right.
means there was Asian carp in it at some point in time. Whether they're there or not, the science says they're there, which means you don't know when that little minnow comes into that bucket,
Mm-hmm.
comes all the way up to the border, and someone puts it in their bucket. They buy it in a store, and at the end of the day, what do we say in Ontario? Don't dump your bait in the water. Take it 30 meters up on shore. And
Yep.
that's the reason why. Could you imagine how easy it is to introduce an invasive species inadvertently,
Yeah.
not from our ignorance, but because we didn't know that that's what was in that bucket, because some of that bait looks the same as some of our native species. And that is a real threat. And when you talk about things like that, as an angler and as a conservationist and a person who loves the outdoors, if anybody hears that as an angler, they'd say,
Mm-hmm.
I understand that now perfectly. I
Yeah.
get it. So it's the reasoning why these laws come into place that people would find fascinating. I think once you really see the work that goes in behind, for example, the committees you're on, whether it's the Penn projects or whatever you're working on with the
Yep.
Lake Ontario unit, you see what's going on behind the scenes to make the best of what an angler on the water has no idea how great his fishing is and the reasons why volunteers or people made that happen. So yeah, this is what I love to do, Lyle, is educate, talk, give them everything I've got in my brain, give them information, right? Because
Yeah.
they love it. They love hearing this stuff, right? And it shows them that, yeah, we are passionate about what you love too. And in between the people that are great, you will always find the folks that just choose to go the opposite direction. And that's our
Mm-hmm.
job, to make sure that we're protecting what's there. So yeah, we'll talk to the anglers on the water. We'll ensure that they don't have any bait. There were times even when I had Ontarians driving across the border to buy bait in the US and bring it back on the lower Niagara River, and I'd have to take it from them. And it's like, you can't bring in that stuff, right? Like,
Right. Right.
so, and then you tell them that story is the reason why, and they just shake their head going, I had no idea. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But we're trying to help out the fishery. And the last thing we need is to allow that to be a potential source. It doesn't mean that it's happened. It doesn't mean that it's from that. But as I said to you, it doesn't mean that we panic. It means, okay, we understand that the DNA could be in that water.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what we can do to prevent it. And so, and that's just good stuff. And people get it, and they'll
Yeah.
support our local bait fish industry. And that's the new rules with bait now is it's challenging, but it's science based. It's led by discovery. It's led by learning from mistakes as to what we've seen, what our biologist teams have seen, and how they help the policy advisors and folks make these decisions to help us sustain things. And our job as a CO is to enforce it, right? So
Yeah. Absolutely.
it's really cool, really interesting field and career. So yeah, I'll run all the way down up in the upper Niagara River, checking anglers, whether they're resident or non-resident, checking limits, checking rods, and communicating, talking to as many people as I possibly can, and even handing out goodies if I've got goodies to kids. It's so important to thank parents
Mm-hmm.
for taking kids fishing. You gotta thank the parent for taking the kids fishing. We really love seeing that. I do personally. So Yeah. And by the end of the day, you've done a 10, 12-hour day, and whatever happens in between, whether you see someone in distress, a boat that might have, lost power or might be taking on water, you're monitoring
Yep.
the VHF. And what you don't hear us on the VHF very often, obviously, we're tiptoeing through the tulips, if you will. We're sneaking through the bush, right? We're
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
moving around but we're listening and we're watching, and it's just one of the different techniques that we use. And obviously, we don't tell you everything, but hey, we're out there, and I've never met you on the water. Imagine that! Like, you've been out guiding for how many years here in the region, and
Yeah.
I've never pulled up on said hello. And it's just because there's just so many people in so many different areas. And there's also places that I know I want to go based on whether they're tips, whether it's information, whether it's informants, whether it's, backdoor information or whatever it might
Hmm.
be. And that helps guide our directed enforcement as well, right? So it's not just, man, I never see them. Holy smokes, you should see how busy these guys are.
Right.
These folks in this province are. It's amazing to me as a senior officer now what it is that we can accomplish with the people that we have. And I think and that's no different than any state or province in
Hmm.
Canada or the US. um, you know we are the folks that you don't see very often, but we're there and we're listening and we're watching and we're getting into places we need to get to.
Yep.
And then, yeah, so at the end of the day, you're making sure that that vessel is maintained, you're making sure that it's safe and operable, because you've got the public watching you, and making sure that at the end of the day that that vessel's filled back up and ready to go, because the last thing you need is the next officer to come along and you have an empty vessel sitting there, right? We
Yeah.
have steps and procedures in place, right? This is different. It's not your own boat anymore. It's now a provincial asset, and you've got to maintain it. And the public expects that you're professional at those times. So, yeah,
Sure.
lots going on. That's just for example. And when I was on, the Marine unit, what I would do on Lake Erie, for example. So, you could sit off the mouth of Port Colborne and literally go out a mile and just wait till 11:30 when the morning rush of anglers have limited out, and you can just start doing vessel stops right on the water and inspecting
Right.
before you even get to the dock. So there's lots of things that we can do all the time. And of course, I thank Niagara Regional Police for helping me out when they can as well, and when I can help them out, it's always great having that partnership, because you learn from both sides, right? So
Hmm.
yeah,
You touched on something there, and I think it's about building, apart from what you guys do and doing it efficiently and being out there with the resources that you have, but building a culture of anglers that care and that want to promote, the responsible actions about the resources. And
yeah,
I believe you kind of touched on it when you're talking about a typical day on the water. You may be having quote unquote, fine day, and then someone loses power or they start sinking, and those crazy things that being a field person would take you into. Do you have any stories about the craziest things I've ever seen on the job?
I can't tell you everything.
Of course.
I can't say much that I'd love to talk about, but I did write down a couple of examples of things that have happened in this region. And
Yeah.
it's been a busy winter. I'm going to say that right now. There is lots going on, 24 hours, 7 days a week in various locations. It can get very busy. But for example, we'll have a spring smelt run. In the last
Hmm.
couple of years, obviously, we haven't been down at ramps that have been non-accessible at the times of our tough times with COVID, but
Yep.
we did have opportunities. Here's a funny kind of quirky evening. You go down in locations such as Queenston, and you're checking 100 people easily. Like, there's just people everywhere.
Yeah.
One evening, I recall, working down there, and there was an individual that was holding a line, tending to a line, and that means you're angling for smelt. You can't, if you're not tending to a line, you're not angling, right? So
Hmm.
I've got to show, and my evidence needs to be, I observed the individual tending to a line. He pulled the net. I saw smelt. He put him in a bucket. I identified myself, etc. So I'd
Yep.
walk up to this individual, and there's people everywhere. And I said, conservation officer, how you doing, sir? Oh, good. And I said, did you happen to have your fishing license on you? All you're required is a certain size of net and a type of net and a fishing license, whether it's conservation or sport. The individual said, yes, it's in my car. Well, you know what it's like down in Queenston. It could be packed at night, right?
Yeah.
So so he went to go to his car. And when I hear that, sometimes I have people drive away. Sometimes I just have whatever, but this person just disappeared. After a little while, I'm like, oh, where did that one guy go? I was just gonna. So I'm looking around, and I get back in the crowds of folks, just kind of, snaking through all the folks and saying hello, and I can't find him. Well, okay, where did he go? So I actually went for a walk, Lyle. I went for a walk, and you know how the ramp, when you're pulling your boat out of Queenston and you go up the hill, you can start driving back up the hill.
Yep.
So I was actually just walking around in the darkness back there, because it's dark at night, right? Obviously, it's, no lights up that way. So I'm just around, sitting there. And I decided to take my flashlight and start shining it up that back hill behind us. And I'm looking around and looking around, and I'm looking and looking. And then all of a sudden, I see the tip of a nose through the leaves on the ground. So this individual actually climbed up the side of that hill, covered himself with leaves to hide, and his nose was sticking out. And I just said,
no way,
sir, it's just a fishing license. Come on down. If you don't have one, we'll work it out. It's just a fishing license right now. I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't have it. It's okay. Like, it's just a ticket. You need to have a license. But the reason why we have a license is it supports conservation. And yes, there's no limit on these, but sir, you don't want to run and hide, because you're going to lead me to think of other things. Like, what are you doing? Why are you hiding? And are you wanted? Like, what is it, right?
A whole host of things that could be going on there.
I just shook my head going, sir, why? And I just got scared. I said, don't be scared. Like, don't be scared. I understand you don't see us very often, but it's, everybody here is expected to help support this industry. We all do. Even I have to buy licenses. There's no freebies. Okay. I support it just like all of you. And I live for it. But that was a night where I just shook my head going, oh boy, like, that's a night. That's what happens. It's just not what we teach, even our youth and our anglers, so it's important. Like, so St. Catharines Game and Fish with the Kids Day Derby and getting kids out there on the pier. I support that 1,000%. And yeah, you go out and shake hands and thank parents, because they're trying to get them on the right track. And there are so many different stories that you can talk about here, not just with fish, but with big game and poaching and things that happen that just it's the reason I wake up, and why my partners wake up, and all the folks that wear our uniform wake up and get out there every day to as I say, provide that voice to fish and wildlife that can't speak for themselves. We've got to be there. It's important. And we're supporting those that also, enjoy the resource. And yeah, you meet all kinds of folks every day. Every day is a different day. That's what we say.
Well, Ron, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join the podcast today. Some great stories, some great information. I think one takeaway for sure is that if Ron says he's going for a walk, it's about to go down.
Yeah, you imagine that, eh? Yeah, I'm going for a walk. I'll be back. He's not coming back for a while.
I like that.
No, but definitely, yeah. Thank you, Lyle, for everything. And remember, to your listeners, our tips line is a reporting line. It's not a snitch line. It's a way for you to communicate with us. You may not have a response that day, but those tips are all looked at. They're all reviewed, and we do have mapping and things that happen with all the information that we receive. So don't ever believe that your calls are going unheard. These officers are working extremely hard in our region and are out there for you. And I really thank you for doing what you do with your podcast, with your YouTube series, and getting out there and showing people what it is to enjoy natural resources and have fun, because it's a great hobby. It's a great way to be in the outdoors, and a great way to support conservation in various ways. So I thank you, Lyle.
Well, guys, I got to say, I'm pretty impressed with Ron's answers. He came prepared to the Love of Fishing podcast today. A lot of times when we have guests on, it's free flowing. We're talking fishing. Sometimes we go down rabbit holes and off different trails, but When I first reached out to Ron, he was very excited to be on the podcast, and he had to go through a lot of different chains of approval to actually be able to speak on behalf of conservation officers and, through the ministry. So I really, really appreciate Ron's dedication to A, getting on the show, and also B, coming prepared with some great answers and some great stories for you. I hope that you found that as entertaining and as informative as I did. Certainly the things about the bait that he talked about, those were all new to me, and I'm someone who's worked in fishing retail selling bait and dealing with bait suppliers. So huge difference between the Canadian side and the US side with how bait works and how the demand works. So that was just a fantastic little look into exactly why the rules are the way that they are. So Ron, thank you so much again. I hope that I can have you back for another episode of the Love of Fishing podcast. It was great to chat with you, and I know that everyone at home enjoyed the conversation as well. Well, it's that time of the show where we do our weekly giveaway. This week's weekly giveaway is brought to you by Team Underdog Cut Bait. Mike and his team put together an awesome product of pre-cut herring strips for salmon trolling. They also have a variety of products that you can use when you're ice fishing or if you're fishing for catfish, as well as a whole bait supply if you like to cut your own. So if you're looking forward to fishing this year and you think that you're in the market for some new salmon bait, give Mike a call. I trust that he'll be both a great person to deal with and also that you'll get the bait that you need to catch that big salmon. To enter to win this week's prize of some cut bait from Team Underdog, all you have to do is be subscribed to this YouTube channel and drop a comment below on what your PB salmon is. If you're listening on Spotify, hop over to YouTube, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. You can enter within the week, so before next week's episode, we'll pick this week's winner, and we'll sort out getting you the prize at a later date. Guys, I'd like to thank you again for listening to another edition of the Love of Fishing podcast. Next week, we have another great episode in store, but until then, don't forget to get outside and go fishing. Peace. I don't think about you any day, anyhow. It don't matter, not a while since I thought about you, babe. Since I thought about you, babe. Since I thought about you, babe. Ever